Perhaps the first thing the government needs to consider is why it has got to that stage. Scotland has passed similar, but not identical, regulations with a far greater degree of cross-party and intra-party consensus than seems to have been managed here in Westminster. And perhaps that's because the First Minister and her Cabinet Secretaries and the senior public health officials have always taken a commendably frank and honest approach with the people of Scotland about the challenges of the virus and the difficulty of the decisions that have to be made. In the summertime, the First Minister initiated a national dialogue with people across Scotland on what a roadmap out of the initial lockdown should and could look like. Instead of promising moonshots and world-beating systems and that it would all be over by Christmas, the Scottish Government and the other devolved governments have worked to take people with them, whether that's the public at large or whether it's their own backbenchers. And we've always been clear that public health and saving lives has to be the priority. Whatever the pain, and there is real pain caused to the economy and livelihoods by these kind of restrictions, that pain is as nothing to a life ended too soon, to a family or a community bereaved by this dreadful disease. And as always, the Scottish National Party sends its deepest sympathies to all those who have lost a loved one as a result of the pandemic. But that's not to minimise the impact and effects of the economic pain. I see it firsthand in Glasgow North, which thrives on the hospitality and entertainment and events sector, and will be interested to find out what the consequences of the government's announcement today about support for pubs will be north of the border. My constituency is home to thousands of creatives, of start-ups, of entrepreneurs who have all been left behind, forgotten, excluded from the Chancellor's support package. We hear the impact from the families genuinely terrified that the £20 universal credit uplift will not be extended beyond March, and from those on legacy benefits who have yet to see a similar uplift. And we all feel the struggle of the frontline public sector workers busting a gut to keep the services that we all depend on going in the most difficult of circumstances. And support for all of these groups, and for those who need to isolate, which is absolutely critical to stopping the virus. In support for these groups, the government has been found wanting. And the Prime Minister was chuntering to the Leader of the Opposition, saying, how do we get people to self-isolate? Well, as he said, start by paying a decent rate of statutory sick pay. Make it affordable for people to stay at home and stay safe. And perhaps if the government had made more effort to support those people, to support the excluded, to support families who are struggling, then it wouldn't be feeling the heat that it is now from its own backbenches. And we just, Madam Deputy Speaker, need to compare that to what we've heard in the last few days in Scotland. A £500 bonus for all NHS and social care staff. For 10 weeks, we all clapped for carers, but that was never going to be enough. And this is a gesture of thanks for extraordinary service. And I really hope the Prime Minister and the Chancellor will have the decency not to level tax on this well-deserved reward. And for the families who need it most, a £100 one-off payment before Christmas to households with children in receipt of free school meals. And a commitment that all primary children will receive free meals, breakfast and lunch, at school and all year round if the SNP is re-elected next year. That's the difference that devolution makes. For NHS workers and families in receipt of these payments, that's not a disaster. That's a Scottish Government working for and delivering for their best interests and the interests of our society as a whole. And if it means that we are using our share of money that the UK Treasury has borrowed on Scotland's behalf, well, that's the point of devolution. And if the Tories don't like it, and I hear some chuntering, the solution is very simple. Independence for Scotland would have meant we could have raised our own finance on our own terms and spent it on our priorities in our own time. And we certainly would have had to wait for the south east of England to be placed into lockdown before the furlough scheme was extended across the whole of the UK. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, if the Prime Minister is feeling pressure from his own side today, he only has himself to blame. Real leadership is about being able to make the hard choices and be honest with people when mistakes are made, especially in a time of crisis. People don't want bluster and false hope. They want honesty and determination and empathy. The devolved governments, have always sought a four nations approach wherever possible, and we've seen that agreement can be reached in the provisions being made for those who need to travel to see loved ones over Christmas. And while that period of easing will be welcomed by many, all of us will have an extra responsibility to be extra vigilant, to minimise risk, to practice social distance, our good hand hygiene, wearing our face coverings, and all the other steps that we've become familiar with. But that familiarity cannot become complacency. The threat of the virus to overwhelm our health service, to undermine the economy and to individual lives across the country has not gone away. So while we welcome the light at the end of the tunnel as vaccines come online, that light must be approached slowly and carefully. So that's why Scotland will continue with its tier system and the difficult decisions that we need until the virus is beaten. The other devolved nations are making similar decisions, and members representing England in this place have a responsibility to do likewise.
Yeah.